and the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Jedwat, the witness with the ACLU. If I'm to understand your position correctly, you're opposed to governors mobilizing their National Guard to secure the border. Is that correct?
I wasn't talking about the National Guard. I was talking about state efforts to actually do immigration enforcement.
I see. So I have a press release here from September of 2023. It says, Governor Newsom increases California National Guard presence at the border to crack down on fentanyl smugglers. Would you take that? Would you say that action by Governor Newsom is appropriate and within the bounds of his authority?
It might be. Yeah. I mean, I have no familiarity with what is referenced in that article.
Well, the press release again, it says Governor Newsom increases California National Guard presence at the border, cracking down on illegal drugs, including fentanyl being smuggled into California. Governor Newsom is increasing the number of California National Guard service members deployed to interdict drugs at U.S. ports of entry along the border by approximately 50%. Governor Newsom said fentanyl is a deadly poison, ripping families apart and communities apart. California is cracking down, he said, and today we're going further by deploying more CalGuard service members to combat this crisis and keep our communities safe. So the governor saw a public safety issue arising from the situation at the border and mobilized the National Guard to try to keep our communities safe. Would you say that was appropriate by the governor?
It probably would, and I would point out that, you know, what we're talking about there, fentanyl at the ports of entry, you know, that's where the fentanyl is, and that's where the focus ought to be, to the extent that that's
okay. But you're making a policy judgment as to what's the greatest, the most effective thing to do.
No,
I'm asking you about his
I'm pointing out that as a
Does he have
factual
the authority?
matter, you know, CBP, the Cato Institute, everyone who's looked at the question agrees that approximately 90% of the fentanyl that's going.
Okay, but again, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about his authority. Do you agree he had the authority to do that?
Again, I don't know the details of that, but it sounds like what was happening was that he was deploying the National Guard either in cooperation with the federal government to assist them at POEs, which, you know, sounds like a reasonable thing to do.
So we have the former Attorney General of Arizona, first Attorney General of Texas here. Would you say that in some sense, your governors, either at the time or now, were simply following the Newsom precedent, that he saw a public safety risk arising from the border and so made use of California resources to assist?
Well, Texas would never follow California precedent.
Fair enough.
But it's the similar strategy.
Yeah, yes, clearly states, even states like California, want to do everything they can to protect the citizens within their states. And that means at times they will deploy the National Guard. It means at times they will deploy Department of Public Safety or state police officers, because I think even the state of California recognizes that there is an unprecedented amount of illegal drugs, of illegal human trafficking coming into our country. And because of that, the cartels have seized operational control of our southern border. And as a result of that, every American is less safe and every child is more in danger of dying of drug overdose.
Thank you. Mr. Jedwat, you also testified that states do not have the authority to take immigration matters into their own hands. You said the Constitution prohibits state regulation of immigration. You said that entry, exclusion, and deportation are exclusively federal matters. Federal officials, you said, decide whether it makes sense to pursue removal at all. Would the same logic apply to states or other jurisdictions that have adopted so-called sanctuary policies, where they actively interfere with federal immigration enforcement? Can we assume, based on your testimony, that you oppose those efforts as well?
I don't think you should assume that, because I think what so-called sanctuary policies are generally about is states opting out of federal enforcement. And that's an authority that states have under the 10th Amendment that protects states against commandeering by the federal government. So, for example, if the federal government said to Texas, we want you to take your land and your personnel and build a processing center on the border, Texas could say, no, thank you. And that's what states and cities are doing with their sanctuary laws. No, thank you. We're not going to use our police.
Okay, but that's different.
Facilities.
Under sanctuary policies, for example, in California, we had someone who was arrested, was in custody. ICE asked to know when he was going to be released. And the sheriff's office said, we can't tell you because of the sanctuary state law. That individual was released the next week. He killed his own 3 daughters and their chaperone. So that seems like it's pretty actively interfering with the federal decision to pursue removal in this proceeding, does it not? And so by the very terms of your testimony, that is something that would be unlawful as well.
I mean, again, it sounds like from what you said that the federal government asked the police to do something and they said no, or the sheriff to do something and they said no.
Taking the decision out of the hands of the federal
And that's,
authorities,
again,
correct?
the anti-commandeering principle that was elucidated by the Supreme Court in Prince versus United States, which was about sheriffs not doing the federal government's bidding in enforcing gun regulations. It's the same principle that applies here.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman from California.